Morning, it's Bob Blackman from P4 Harrow East. Just welcome to my Facebook Live session, which unusually today is actually being recorded in advance because of other constituency commitments that I have to make this afternoon. Ladies and gentlemen, a great pleasure to be with you. Obviously, the top news has been the position just over a week ago now, that the Prime Minister Boris Johnson made his decision to resign as leader of the Conservative Party and then step down as Prime Minister when his successor is actually chosen and elected. Boris has achieved much during his premiership, of course, including the fastest possible vaccine rollout in the whole of certainly the Western world and probably across the world. Taking us through the crisis of COVID and indeed ensuring that our economy has bounced back from being virtually shut down during the COVID pandemic. And he's to be applauded for that. No other Prime Minister in 100 years has faced a public health emergency like this ever before. So I think on all those COVID decisions in relation to dealing with the crisis, got every one of the big decisions right, and we should congratulate and thank him for what he actually achieved. He also, remember, led this country through the general election of 2019, produced a large-scale majority, biggest majority the Conservative Party's had certainly since 1987 in a general election. And it was on the theme of getting Brexit done and then moving on to deliver on more police, more nurses, more hospitals, dealing with the problems that everyone faces, free from the European Union, and therefore enabling us to make our own decisions. The good news is, of course, that very largely Brexit has been delivered. There's still the issue of ensuring that Northern Ireland is treated as an equal part of the United Kingdom, and we're well on to achieving that in not only in legislation but also in discussion and partnership with the people of Northern Ireland, the people of the Republic of Ireland, and indeed the European Union itself. But people need to be very clear. We are not going to put the United Kingdom at risk. We're not going to have a position whereby Northern Ireland is placed in an inferior position when it is an integral part of the United Kingdom. So that still needs to be resolved. In terms of police, we are at record police numbers now in this country, and indeed more nurses have been recruited right across the National Health Service. The National Health Service, of course, is incredibly resilient, having to deal with all the problems, as everyone will know, with COVID and everything else. Now, we do have long waiting lists now in the National Health Service for routine operations. That is got to be the major aspect that the government is going to concentrate on, particularly as we go into the winter. People that are potentially suffering from cancer or other such life-threatening diseases need to be scanned, they need to be assisted, they need to be diagnosed, and their treatment needs to start. We can't have backlogs in that regard. Now, I'll talk about the weather and other things in a few minutes, but what is important here is that we must make sure that not only does the National Health Service get the resources that it needs, but equally make sure that we're in a position whereby the ambulance service, the A&E departments, and indeed the hospitals themselves have the capacity to cope with all those people that require help and assistance. So that's still work to be done, without question. The good news, of course, is that the economy has grown in May after slipping back in April. So the economy is rising steadily, but not spectacularly, but we are bouncing back from a position whereby the economy basically was shut down. So there are going to be peaks and troughs, and that is clearly one of the issues that we're going to have to struggle with over the course of this autumn. The big problem, of course, is that having shut down the world economy because of COVID, as the economies of the world open up, there's a shortage of goods and services and raw materials. That has led to immediate increases in the prices of those raw materials and the goods that people need. And once again, feeding through to inflation. So from that perspective, we knew there was going to be a problem with inflation coming up. What has exacerbated this is the illegal invasion by Russia of Ukraine. And the brave people of Ukraine fight on and fight on. And indeed, they are in a position whereby the position there is stagnating in terms of Russia's interventions and Ukraine fighting back against Russia. And most people believed, I think, across the world, that Russia would overwhelm Ukraine in a matter of days. It's now dragged on for a very long time indeed, into months rather than weeks. And the brave Ukrainian people need to continue their resistance. We in the United Kingdom are providing help and assistance by providing weapons to the Ukrainian armed forces, and indeed, of course, training the forces in how to use them. However, this is a very dangerous time, because the fact is that Russia is contemplating not only the invasion of Ukraine, but threatening Moldova, and then potentially our NATO allies in Romania, and our new allies that are to come in Finland and Sweden. That's a really serious problem, because if there is an incursion into NATO supporting countries, then we in NATO and in the rest of the nations of NATO are obligated under our treaty to help and assist them, which would then naturally lead to a global conflict. Very serious indeed, and we obviously have to look at that particular aspect as being something that could once again over the summer be even more dramatic. Certainly we cannot afford President Putin and the Russians to win this war in Ukraine, because they would be involved. We must learn from the mistake that we made in 2014. And in 2014, when Russia illegally annexed the Crimea, the West stood back and said, okay, well, we'll let you get away with it. Unfortunately, now, some 8 years later, we're now suffering the consequences of that, where they've invaded Ukraine, and of course, death and destruction and misery is being heaped upon Ukrainian people. Once again, the British people have been incredible, and I know many people in Harrow East have offered their homes to Ukrainian refugees, and if they haven't offered their homes, they've offered help and assistance and raised money for the people that literally are being uprooted from their homes. To give you a flavour, more than 1 million people across the border between Ukraine and Romania. Well over 1 million people have crossed the border from Ukraine into Poland. We have taken some of the people, and obviously we're working, and my good friend, the Minister Lord Harrington, is working on ensuring that we have help and support for people fleeing persecution, so that we are able to honour the pledge that we made to help and assist Ukrainian refugees to come to this country, either with their families as a family unit, or alternatively to share someone else's home. I'm very proud of the fact that many people have offered that facility and are being supported. So thank you for all those of you that have done that. It's the right sort of thing to do from a humanitarian perspective, and it's the right thing that we should be looking at. In terms of the cost of living, of course, we are looking at just on Thursday, the first tranche of payments went out to the least well off of payment of £336 direct into their bank accounts in order to cushion the problems of the cost of living crisis that we're currently going through. That's the first 50% of the payment. So the payment will eventually be just over £652 that those poorest in society will get. That is on top of the £150 that is being provided via the council tax to those people who live in bands A to D within properties. And of course, there's an additional £150 for registered disabled people to cushion them against the cost of living problems. And finally, of course, the £400 that everyone will get this autumn in order to cushion us all against the cost of living increase that's taking place. The combination of pressures within the economy as a result of coming out of COVID, and then the illegal invasion of Ukraine with Russian gas therefore being cut off, and the price of gas going up, of course, have then led to inflation of about 10.1%, predictions that inflation may increase still a bit further before it starts to come down. Of course, that is a pressure on everyone's bills. We all understand that, and the government is doing everything possible to cushion people against those particular costs. And I suspect that when we get to the autumn, there'll be further such measures as are being required, given the predictions that the energy price cap will increase still further, and therefore a large number of people will be in fuel poverty. And we have to be clear, although the weather's very, very hot at the moment, we can anticipate that we'll get cold weather, obviously, in the autumn and winter. And during those months, people's heating bills will increase dramatically. And therefore, we need to put people in a position whereby they are supported and assisted through that process. And I know the government will look to try and assist in every shape or form they can. Now, this week and over last weekend, I've been deeply embroiled, as most people know, in the leadership contest to replace Boris Johnson. Obviously, he continues as Prime Minister and will continue until the 5th of September, when the House comes back from its recess, the summer recess. That has been the traditional way that we've done things. For people, you may remember, of course, that when David Cameron stepped down, he stepped down as Conservative Party leader, staying as Prime Minister until Theresa May was elected, and then Theresa took over. When Theresa stepped down, she continued as Prime Minister until Boris Johnson was elected. And I could go through back in the history when we have changed Prime Ministers mid-term of the government, not least Harold Macmillan, Winston Churchill, and other such figures who were remarkably achievers as Conservative Prime Ministers. So it does happen. It's one of those things that we are used to. We have a well-trod path. What we didn't have a well-trod path, however, was coping with the position that we needed to get to, having two candidates to contest the leadership in ballots, which will take place for Conservative Party members across the summer to choose the new leader of the Conservative Party. So last weekend, I spent a lot of time going through the rules, rewriting them to make sure they were up to date and according to what we wanted to achieve, which was to slim down what appeared to be a very long list of candidates. So we'll get down to two candidates by next Thursday, the 21st of July, when the House goes into its summer recess. Equally, I had to construct a time frame to allow Conservative MPs to vote on a regular basis, to get down to the last two, but also to have hustings and other discussions amongst colleagues about who the best person, the best two people would be for the membership at large to consider. So that was an exciting time putting together the rules. And I'm very pleased to say that things this week have gone very, very smoothly. On Monday, we had the new elections for the 1922 committee. I'm very pleased to say that I was re-elected unopposed as the secretary of the 1922 committee, jointly with my colleague Gary Sambrough. Sir Graham Brady was re-elected as chairman, and Sir Geoffrey Clifton Brown as treasurer. We did have a voting contest for the two vice chairmen, and the existing two vice chairmen, Masgani and William Ragg, were re-elected. We had a marathon contest for the executive where 24 candidates stood for 12 places. As you can imagine, it was a long count. And for those of you that have participated or watched, observed the election counts when we're doing electing councillors, when we're electing 3 members to a ward or 2 members to a ward, that's quite a long count. Imagine when you're electing 12 from 24, it's an even longer count. And it was a very closely fought election with very small margins between different colleagues. So under those circumstances, the count had to be absolutely scrupulously clear and making sure that every single vote was checked and obviously recorded properly and counted. So that was on Monday. And then on Monday night, the new executive met and agreed the rules with slight amendments that I suggested over for the election of the new leader. And equally, what was agreed was the timeline. So on the following day, we had nomination day. So candidates for the leadership had to get a proposer, seconder, and 18 supporters. on their nomination papers before the end of Tuesday's business by 6 o'clock in the evening. As we know, a series of candidates came forward, 8 in total, and the executive had agreed that on the first ballot, anyone getting less than 30 votes would be eliminated. On Wednesday, we had our first ballot, and of the 8 candidates, Nadhim Zahawi failed to achieve the requisite 30, and the other candidate, Jeremy Hunt, with the fringe bottom, were both eliminated, leaving 6 candidates to contest the ballot on Thursday. So we then had hustings in the evening, on Wednesday evening, and on Thursday we had the second ballot. And the bottom candidate was Suella Braverman, so she was eliminated, which then leaves in the contest for the ballot on Monday with 5 candidates. Those 5 candidates then will have hustings on Monday. We'll have another ballot on Monday. On Tuesday, we'll have, obviously, the one person will be eliminated on Tuesday, and we will once again eliminate another candidate on Monday night. So 4 will go to the ballot on Tuesday, and then 3 to a ballot on Wednesday if required. So we'll get to the position whereby we have our 2 candidates to go before the leadership by Thursday, which was our aim. The position will then be that those 2 candidates will agree with Conservative campaign headquarters on a schedule across the rest of July and August, with a postal ballot where members will be able to vote either electronically or by post for the leader of their choice. That leader will then be announced on the 5th of September. Boris Johnson will resign, and the new Prime Minister will take up his or her role, depending on who is finally elected for the job. But the good thing I think about this contest is that we've had a very diverse set of candidates, all with different ideas, all with different viewpoints, and it's enabling quite a conversation to take place amongst Conservative MPs about the direction of the party in Parliament. Over the summer, there will be the opportunity for party members to determine the direction of the party going forward from the autumn. And I predict that we'll have 2 excellent candidates for members to choose from. Now, some individuals have been asking, well, who are you? Well, as Secretary of the 1922 Committee, I have to be strictly neutral, because then no one can accuse me of any bias in the whole process. So I have been, I obviously have my own vote, which I'll keep private as we go forward. But what I wasn't going to do was declare for one of the candidates, because that's unfair then on the other candidates when I'm administering the ballots. So I do have my own views, as everyone will know, but I'm not revealing those to anyone. So we'll get to that stage, and watch this space is what I would say. But finally, I think there's some other of course, news that is going on. I mentioned the illegal invasion by Russia of Ukraine. There is also the desperate position that is going on in Sri Lanka, where literally the Sri Lankan government have run out of money. The president has fled the island, and the Prime Minister and the government have promised to resign. As I speak, obviously the occupation of the presidential palace continues. I believe that obviously that there's a degree of calm in Sri Lanka now, which is good news, because this has been a popular uprising against the government. I pray for people coming together, and obviously there are a number of people here. In Harrow we have a very large Sinhalese community, a very large Tamil community, and obviously a Muslim community as well. So people of all religions, actually from the island, all of whom will have relatives back in Sri Lanka. And at a time when money's run out, the situation is a real crisis. and very importantly, China has a stranglehold over Sri Lanka, having lent them absolutely huge amounts of money. They control the deep sea port, they control one of the international airports. This is a very worrying sign for the West and for India in particular. So I hope that the British government is going to intervene and assist the people of Sri Lanka as part of the Commonwealth to enable them to have a smooth transition of power to a new government who will set back the position into a sensible, rational way of running the country for the benefit of all the people of the island. And all our prayers are with people that are on the island. Turning to rather more local matters, the first thing to say is, of course, the Mayor Sadiq Khan is conducting a consultation on expansioning the ultra-low emission zone. Now that runs until the 29th of July. I've been frequently reminding people to have your say. Remember that what this position is that the ULEZ will expand from, originally expanded it just last year, to the north and south circulars. Now he will extend it to the GLA boundary. That means if you're just literally taking your car to the shops, taking your car for a normal journey, you'll get charged for the privilege unless you meet the stringent conditions of the ULEZ zone. Equally, if your friends or family visit you, say from Bushy or Watford or Radlett or one of the other areas close by, they will get charged for coming into the zone if their car is not up to the required standards. Now, we all want to see clean air, and I think everyone would agree with that, but this is being done at reckless speed and in unfair fashion, because the reality is that people who have the lowest income, often young people, will have the oldest vehicles, which will not be ULEZ compliant, and therefore they'll be literally ripped off. It's hard enough at the moment when people are paying an absolute fortune to fill up and pack at the pumps. Equally, we're suffering insurance, car tax, and other levies on car owners. We end up with yet another charge on the motorist. To me, it's the wrong thing to do at the wrong time. We can consider, obviously, ULEZ, but people need to be given a lot more notice, and we need to enable people to swap out their cars or other vehicles for vehicles that will be compliant. It's no good just saying we're going to do this at breakneck speed because people haven't got the money to replace their vehicles. Now in Harrow, the average is that we have 2.5 cars per household. So just imagine what the impact of that is. And people have perfectly well-conditioned cars which run smoothly, and clearly they don't want to replace them. Why should they? That's the clear concern. This to me is a step too far for Sadiq Khan, but no surprise there. We also face the crisis in TfL of the fare box. The reality is that the government have now pumped in well over £5 billion to cover the loss of income that TfL experienced because of the pandemic. Traveller numbers are nowhere near what they were pre-pandemic. I think we're at the position of about 70% ridership on the tube and buses since the recovery and since we got out of the lockdowns. That demonstrates that fewer people are travelling by public transport. The government have continued to bail Transport for London out of the costs that they're suffering as a result of the loss of income. What they won't do, and quite rightly won't do, is cover the cost of Sadiq Khan, where he has failed to deliver on any savings proposals. He's failed to deliver on ensuring that fares rise in line with inflation. He's also failed to take on the unions. I find it reprehensible that when London is brought to a halt through strike action on London Transport, on the Underground, or even on any other services, Sadiq Khan never mutters a word, never a word of criticism against the trade unions, who after all are his paymasters. So the reality is that we as council taxpayers quite rightly should be saying, hang on, you're the mayor, you need to sort this out and prevent these strikes from happening. Equally, the government is still in negotiations with Transport for London to try and reach a long-term financial deal. Part of that deal, Sadiq Khan and TfL have to find savings within the TfL budget. Quite right too, everyone else is having to tighten their belts, so should TfL. Not just ripping motorists off, but actually looking at some of these other areas around how the tube service operates, particularly in terms of what happens about the treatment of pensions and other ancillary costs that take place within the TfL arrangements. So I look to that happening and reaching some sort of agreement as soon as possible. The government have extended once again for another 2 weeks the interim financial backing for TfL to keep it going. This can't continue on forever. We need to have a firm agreement, and the Mayor needs to come up with his proposals to make savings. Equally, on the position of the police, the Mayor is in charge of policing in London. Crime has been increasing steadily. We've seen knife crime, we've seen murders and violent crime increasing in London as a direct result of the failure of the Mayor to take appropriate action. He needs to understand that it's his duty to act as the Police and Crime Commissioner for London, to be on the side of victims and actually take action to encourage and help the police to do their job. The police do a fantastic job for us. Literally every day, every week, every year, police officers leave their homes and they leave their loved ones behind. The loved ones never know whether that police officer will return alive because they offer themselves at risk literally every single day. They need our support, they need our help. And whilst there will always be problems with a force which is as big as London's police force, the reality is the vast majority of police officers want to keep us safe in our homes and on our streets. And that's what they do as an absolute commitment. So we should be supporting those good officers that do that wonderful job for us on our behalf. And it's important, therefore, we give them the tools to do the job, but also the backing to do that job and to combat not only violent crime, but the gangs, the drug running, and other such activities. Turning to Harrow Council matters, I'm very pleased, obviously, that we had a fantastic triumph in May when, thanks to all of you going out and voting for Conservative councillors, we now have a Conservative-run council, thank goodness, for the first time with a solid majority since 2000, first time in terms of elections since 2006, since 2010, when Labour took over power in Harrow. And what we saw was the council tax going up every single year, services getting worse, and indeed very much poorly structured. So I'm pleased that the new council group, led by Councillor Paul Osborne and also Councillor Marion Ashton, Deputy Leader, have made a great start on transforming Harrow in the way that we said. So, being delivered already will be the 1 hour free parking outside shops. That equalises the position in relation to supermarkets. At most supermarkets where they've got car parks, you can park for an hour and a half free of charge. Why shouldn't you be able to park outside local shops for an hour free of charge as well? That will encourage local shops to grow and grow our local economy. That's got to be good news for those shops and for shoppers. 20 minutes free parking is all very well, but it doesn't really allow you enough time to go into those shops and do the things you need to do and then go home. So I think that's really good news. The moratorium on tall buildings is fantastic. This is what we've asked for a long time. We live in Harrow in suburbia, and we want to preserve suburbia. Now there is a place for tall buildings, and clearly we can't undo the mistakes of the past. So the tall buildings that have either been granted permission or have already been built will remain. But it does mean that nothing above 6 stories, as per the London plan, will be permitted in parts of suburbia. We can have some development. No one should be against development per se, but let's make sure that the development that we have actually fits in to the scenery and the backdrop of our constituency. That to me is paramount. And the third area that I'm obviously pleased about is the start of dealing with fly tipping. And I do know that further enforcement action has been taken. New arrangements are being considered for the autumn. Obviously, having free bulk and waste collection is good news because it means that people don't have the excuse anymore. Oh, we need to dump our rubbish on the streets, or we need to, no one comes to collect it. Oh, it costs a lot of money to take it to do it. That goes, and the reality is that that will mean some of the flights of people will be dealt with. It's not going to deal with everything, but it has to be a whole strategy. So I'm pleased that the council have made a start on doing this, and indeed will be doing further as we go on. And indeed, measures will be taken to stop frivolous spending and indeed preventing the loss of massive losses that are going to take place under Labour's failed regeneration schemes. And one of the issues is to sort out the future of the Civic Centre site. I'm delighted that the new administration have cancelled the decision to build a new Civic Centre, literally on the other side on the site of the Peel Road car park. That to me was a ridiculous decision in the first place, so I'm delighted they cancelled that. And now they have to sort out the Civic Centre site itself. I'll leave that to my colleagues to come forward with their proposals, but no doubt they will be in the true Conservative tradition of good value for money, but also in keeping with the area, which is absolutely vital. Finally, ladies and gentlemen, it's going to be very hot this weekend and probably into next week. So please stay hydrated, get your factor, whichever sun factor you need, but actually probably a high sun factor for you, your children, and make sure that your relatives are looked after and don't expose themselves too much to the sun. Equally, think of your pets, because often they will be the ones really suffering in this heat, because they're not used to it. None of us are used to this heat that we're experiencing. So please look after yourselves, stay safe, and ensure that you enjoy the good weather, but enjoy it safely. So thank you very much for listening. We didn't get any particular questions for this particular Facebook Live event, but I hope that that's dealt with some of the issues. As always, my office is open for receipt of telephone calls, letters, emails from constituents on any matter, any subject. We'll endeavour to either answer it ourselves or get you an answer from the appropriate authorities. That's the guarantee that we always provide, a first-rate service to you. And it will be one of the challenges that my colleagues have to face is how to make sure that Harrow Council operates in answering emails, answering the phone, and dealing with residents' questions as speedily and as efficiently as is possible. But you know, let's ensure that happens, and let's ensure that all of us can enjoy the summer and make sure that we enjoy it safely. I will be running my work experience programme over the beginning of August, so if you're not away on holiday anyway, you may get a knock on the door and we'll be talking to you, and I look forward to conversing with you directly. Anyway, in the meantime, have a great weekend.